Imagine being in the middle of nowhere, Texas. It's 11 p.m. You're not looking for anything, but something is waiting for you. The GPS dies, the map fails, and the only light left is a blue glow button is not valid. In that silence, before what science cannot name, I was looking at the figure, and I asked the question that could damn my soul. Are you a fallen angel? His answer didn't come from a holy book. It was a cold, hard observation about who really dictates the rules of power and who we are in this reality. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea, or just some water, and sit back as we begin this journey together. Now, let's go back to that night. Elias Thorne stood in the middle of the dirt road, holding his cell phone above his head, trying to pick up any GPS signal. Nothing. The screen showed only a frozen map and an error message. It was almost 11 at night, and he was completely lost in the deserted hills of rural Texas. He looked around. Only darkness. Dry bushes swaying in the cold wind and that unsettling silence that exists only in places where no human should be at that hour. Elias took a deep breath, feeling the cold air rush into his lungs, and walked back to the truck. "Damn GPS," he muttered, tossing his phone onto the passenger seat. The emergency call had come in 40 minutes ago. An automated voice from the company's central office. "Critical power outage. Isolated rural property. Address Route 47, kilometer 89. Customer waiting. No extra details." Elias had quickly jotted down the address, grabbed his toolbox, and left. He needed this extra work. The bills couldn't wait, and night work paid double. But now, after following increasingly narrow and deserted roads, after passing empty farms and unmarked gates, the GPS simply stopped working. Elias was alone in the middle of nowhere with no idea where to go. He started the engine again and drove slowly down the dirt road, his headlights cutting through the darkness. There had to be some landmark, some house, someone who could show him the way. But all he saw were empty fields, old fences, and that immense sky full of stars that seemed to swallow up any trace of civilization. Then, something caught his eye. A light. It wasn't the warm light of a house. It wasn't the soft yellow of a porch light. It was something different. Blue, pulsing, coming from behind a rise of land about 200 meters ahead on the left side of the road. Elias slowed, frowning. Maybe it was a spotlight, some farmer working late, or maybe a cell tower. That would explain the lost signal, some late-night maintenance. He turned the truck toward the light, turning off the main road and onto a rough dirt path. The tires rattled over loose rocks. The blue light grew brighter, more intense, pulsing at regular intervals as if it were breathing. Elias stopped the truck at the top of the rise, and what he saw made his heart stop. In the valley below, perched on flat ground, surrounded by bushes and rocks, there was something that simply shouldn't be there. It was large, metallic, round at the base, but with an irregular structure at the top, full of angles that seemed to defy all architectural logic. Blue light pulsed from within the structure, seeping through cracks and crevices, illuminating the surrounding ground with an eerie glow. There was no engine sound. There was no smoke. Just that silent light pulsing, pulsing, pulsing. Elias felt his hands tighten on the steering wheel. His entire body went rigid. This wasn't a spotlight. It wasn't a tower. It wasn't anything he knew. And then he saw the figure. Something moved beside the structure. A silhouette, tall, slender, moving strangely, as if floating lightly above the ground. The blue light partially illuminated the shape, but Elias couldn't see any details, only outlines, something that wasn't human. His heart began to pound wildly. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Every instinct in his body screamed one word: run away. But Elias didn't move, because in that moment, as he watched that thing move in the valley below, as the blue light pulsed and the silence weighed like lead, an old, deep memory rose from the depths of his mind. Something he had heard years ago in a small church from a preacher with a deep voice and a piercing gaze. Fallen angels walk among us. They come to deceive, to possess, to destroy, and when you least expect it, they will be before you. Elias swallowed hard. His hands were shaking now. He knew what it was, and he knew he should have stayed home. Elias Thorne was not a happy man, and he knew it. At 60, He carried the weight of a life that seemed to have crumbled piece by piece, with nothing left to hold on to. The divorce had happened 8 years ago, but the wound was still raw, bleeding daily in his mind. It wasn't just the separation. It was the betrayal. It was the humiliation of discovering his wife had been with another man for months, while he worked double time to support his family. And worst of all, her son had chosen to stay with her. Daniel, his only son, 29 years old. He hadn't spoken to Elias in 5 years. Not a call, not a text, not even at Christmas. Elias had tried at first. He'd called, texted, even shown up at his ex-wife's house a few times. But Daniel always found an excuse not to be there or simply didn't answer. Eventually, Elias stopped trying. Anger had grown like a weed in his chest. Anger at his ex-wife, anger at his son, anger at God who had allowed everything to fall apart. Elias went to church every Sunday, prayed before meals, read the Bible occasionally, but God felt distant, as if on the other side of thick glass, listening but not responding. And then there was the fear. Elias has always feared demonic possession. Ever since he was a child, hearing stories in church about evil spirits taking control of people sent shivers down his spine. As a teenager, he had recurring nightmares about shadows whispering his name, invisible hands grabbing him in the dark. As an adult, the fear never went away. It just changed form. He believed aliens were fallen angels, demons in disguise, beings who came to deceive humanity, to prepare the ground for the end of times. Elias had read articles, watched documentaries, heard preachers talk about it. It all made sense to him. Why would beings from other planets come to Earth? To help? No, to deceive, to possess, to destroy. And now he was standing in the middle of nowhere, looking at something that confirmed all his fears. Elias took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in his hands. He should leave back out. Get back onto the main road. Forget about work. Go home. But something was holding him back. Maybe it was the need for money. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was something deeper. Something he couldn't quite name. He looked at his cell phone. Still no signal. He looked down into the valley. The blue light continued to pulse. The figure still moved slowly near the metal structure. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, trying to think clearly. His life was already destroyed. Alone, divorced, with a son who wouldn't speak to him, working emergency night shifts because he needed every extra penny to pay the bills. What else could go wrong? He opened his eyes and looked back down into the valley. No, this was different. This was supernatural, spiritual. This was the kind of thing that could destroy him in ways he couldn't even imagine. But at the same time, something inside him whispered, what if it was an answer? What if God had led him here for a reason? What if this was a test? Elias shook his head, irritated with himself. What kind of test was this? God didn't test people by placing demons in their path. That was temptation. That was a trap. He put his hand on the car keys, ready to start the engine and drive away. But then, the figure stopped moving, and slowly, very slowly, he turned towards Elias. Even from a distance, even in the dim light, Elias felt something, as if he were being watched, as if the thing knew he was there. His heart raced, sweat beaded on his temples, every muscle in his body screamed for escape. But Elias couldn't move because, in that moment, as that figure watched him from the valley below, he realized something that terrified him even more than any demon or fallen angel. He realized that deep down, a small part of him wanted to go down there, and that scared him more than anything else. Elias sat in the truck for almost 5 minutes, staring at the figure in the valley. His brain worked frantically, trying to find a logical explanation for what he was seeing. There had to be an explanation. There always was. Maybe it was a weather balloon. He'd read about it. The government was testing it, launching strange equipment, and sometimes it crashed in remote locations. The blue light could be some kind of exposed lithium battery, the kind that glows brightly when damaged. And the figure, maybe it was a recovery technician wearing some kind of specialized suit. Yes, that made sense. Elias took a deep breath, trying to convince himself. Weather balloon, recovery technician, nothing supernatural, nothing demonic, just military technology he didn't understand. But as he formulated this explanation in his mind, the figure began to move again. And the way it moved, it wasn't human. The movements were too fluid, too smooth, as if there were no rigid joints, as if the entire body were made of something malleable, adaptable. Elias felt his stomach churn. No, it wasn't a technician. Technicians didn't move like that. He looked around, searching for other signs of activity. If this were truly a military or government operation, there would be other people. Vehicles, cordon lines, helicopters perhaps, but there was nothing. Just that metal structure, that pulsing blue light, and that lone figure. Elias picked up his phone again, trying to find a signal. Nothing. The screen showed 0 bars, as if all communication had been cut off. He tried calling the company's central office, but the call wouldn't even connect. He tried opening the GPS again, but the app froze and closed by itself. This was not normal. He set his phone down on the bench and looked at his hands. They were shaking. Not much, but enough for him to notice. He clenched his fists, trying to control the tremor, but it was no use. His body was reacting to something his mind was still struggling to process. Elias glanced at the toolbox in the back seat. Screwdrivers, pliers, a multimeter, electrical tape, simple tools for simple problems. He was an electrician. He fixed wiring, replaced circuit breakers, installed electrical panels. His entire life was based on logic, cause and effect, problems with clear solutions. But that thing in the valley below had no clear solution. He took another deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs, and made a decision. He would go down there, not out of curiosity, not out of courage, but because he needed to know. He needed to confirm that this was something explainable, something rational, something he could understand, and then forget. Elias started the truck's engine, but didn't move immediately. He stood there, hands on the steering wheel, staring out at the valley, gathering his courage. Then slowly he began to descend the uneven slope, his headlights illuminating the rooted path. With every meter he advanced, the metal structure grew larger, more real, more impossible to ignore. The blue light pulsed more intensely now, almost hypnotic, and Elias had to look away a few times to maintain his concentration. The terrain was difficult, full of loose rocks and potholes, and the truck shook violently as it descended. When he was about 50 meters from the structure, Elias stopped the vehicle. He turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. He sat, listening only to his own breathing and the distant sound of the wind. The blue light continued to pulse, but now he could see more details. The structure was irregularly shaped, almost organic, as if molded rather than built. There were panels or plates on the surface, but they didn't appear welded or bolted together. They seemed fused, integrated, as if they were part of a single body, and the figure stood to the side, motionless, as if waiting. Elias swallowed. His mouth was dry. He grabbed the bottle of water he always kept in the cup holder and took a sip, trying to moisten his throat. The water went down cool, but it didn't ease the tension in his chest. He looked at the truck door. He could open it. He could get out. He could walk over and confirm that it was just what? A weather balloon? A secret military project? A scientific experiment? Or something completely different? Elias closed his eyes for a moment, and an old memory surfaced. He was in church, maybe 15 years old, listening to the pastor talk about signs of the end times. There will be deceptions, the pastor said, his voice echoing off the walls. Deceptive signs and wonders, beings that will come from heaven, but they are not from God. They are from the realms of darkness, disguised as light, preparing the way for destruction. Elias opened his eyes, feeling a chill run down his spine. Fallen angels, demons, evil spiritual entities that could take physical form, that could deceive, possess, and destroy. He'd always believed this ever since he was a child, and now he was face to face with something that confirmed all his fears. But then, a rational voice in his mind whispered, "What if it isn't? What if you're wrong? What if this is just advanced technology? Something you don't understand but is perfectly explainable?" Elias shook his head, irritated by his own doubts. He couldn't sit there forever. He had to do something. He had to find out. He slowly opened the truck door, and the sound of creaking metal seemed to echo throughout the valley. He placed one foot on the ground, then the other, and stood beside the truck. The cold wind hit his face, carrying a strange smell. It wasn't bad, but it was different. Metallic chemical, like ozone after a storm, but more intense. Elias took a step forward, then another. His boots crunched over the loose stones, and he tried to walk slowly without making too much sound, as if it mattered. The figure still didn't move. Elias stopped about 30 meters away, his heart pounding so hard he could hear the pulse in his ears. The blue light pulsed, and now he could see it coming from inside the structure, through gaps and openings that looked like cracks, but were too organized to be accidental. And then the figure moved. Slowly, she turned fully toward Elias, and for the first time, he saw her face. It wasn't human. The head was larger, elongated, with large, dark eyes that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. The skin was a grayish, almost silvery hue, and appeared smooth with no visible pores. There was no prominent nose, just 2 small openings. The mouth was a thin, almost imperceptible line. Elias felt his legs weaken. The tremor in his hands intensified. His heart raced so fast he thought he might faint. But he didn't run away, because in that moment, as he looked at that being that shouldn't exist, as his mind struggled between terror and rationalization, a single question arose in his mind, stronger than any fear. "What do you want from me?" And as if it had heard the unspoken question, the being slowly raised one of its hands, and he pointed to something next to the metal structure. Elias looked in the indicated direction and saw what appeared to be an exposed panel with visible wires and components, some of them emitting faint sparks. It looked damaged, as if something had burned or broken. And then Elias understood that thing needed help. "I needed an electrician." Elias stood there, staring at the damaged panel, then at the being, then back at the panel. His brain tried to process what was happening, but the pieces just wouldn't fit. That thing was asking him for help. An electrician. Of all the people in the world, of all the qualified professionals out there that wanted hair repair, a spaceship, or whatever that was. Elias felt a wave of indignation rise in his chest, mixed with fear and confusion. He took a step back, shaking his head. "No," he said aloud, his voice coming out shakier than he intended. "No, no, no. This is not happening." The being didn't move. It just continued to point at the panel, its large, dark eyes fixed on Elias, unblinking, expressionless. Elias felt anger rising inside him. Anger at being here. Anger at having descended into that damned valley. Anger at that thing having the audacity to ask for help as if he were just a convenient tool. "You think I'm going to help you," Elias said, his voice growing firmer now, fueled by indignation. "You think I'm an idiot? I know you are, E.E." The being slowly lowered his hand, but continued to watch Elias silently. Elias pointed a trembling finger at him. "You're a fallen angel, a demon. You came here to deceive, to possess, to destroy, and you think I'm just going to fix your ship, use me for your evil purposes?" Silence. Just the wind blowing through the rocks, and that blue light pulsing, pulsing, pulsing. Elias laughed, but it was a humorless laugh full of bitterness. Of course you found me. You probably guided me here, made my GPS stop working, brought me to this abandoned place, and now you want me to do your dirty work." He took another step back toward the truck. "Well, forget it. I'm not going to be your servant. I'm not going to be owned. I'm not going." The being raised its hand again, but this time it didn't point at the panel. It pointed at Elias, and then slowly it placed its hand on its own chest, as if it were introducing itself, or trying to communicate something. Elias stopped frowning. He watched the gesture, trying to understand. The being didn't seem threatening. There was no aggression in its movements, just calm, a disturbing calm. "What do you want?" Elias asked, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. The being pointed again at the damaged panel. Then it pointed at Elias. Then it pointed at the panel again. Elias shook his head. "I'm not going to help you. I don't." The being stopped its gesture and began walking toward the panel. Elias immediately backed away, ready to run. But the being didn't approach him. It simply walked up to the exposed panel and touched one of the wires, which was emitting faint sparks. Immediately, the blue light pulsing throughout the structure began to flicker irregularly. Some sections went completely dark. A low sound, like a distant hum, began to come from within the structure, growing fainter and fainter. Elias watched, fascinated in spite of himself. It was like watching a complex machine slowly shut down, losing power, dying. The being stepped away from the panel and looked at Elias again. There was no urgency in its movements, but there was something in its eyes. Something Elias couldn't quite name. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't manipulation. It was necessity. Elias felt his resistance waver. He looked at the panel, then at the being, then at his own hands. Hands that had fixed thousands of electrical problems throughout his life. Hands that knew wires, circuits, voltages, resistances. "You're manipulating me," Elias said, but his voice no longer held the same strength. "That's what you do. You deceive. You make it seem like you need help." And then, he didn't finish the sentence because he didn't know how to finish it. What would come next? Possession? Destruction? Elias closed his eyes, trying to think clearly. His entire life, he had believed aliens were fallen, angels, demons in disguise, evil entities preparing the end of times. Every preacher he'd heard, every article he'd read, every documentary he'd watched, they all said the same thing. Don't trust. Don't get close. Don't help. But now, standing there looking at this being who seemed to genuinely need help, Elias felt something that disturbed him deeply. Doubt. What if he didn't help? The being could do something bad to him. Or what if everything he'd been taught was based on fear, not truth? What if that being wasn't so evil, but just different? Elias opened his eyes and looked at the panel again. He could clearly see the problem now. There was a burned-out component, something that looked like a fuse or voltage regulator, and the wires connecting it were partially melted. It was a simple problem. Any experienced electrician could fix it in 15 or 20 minutes. But this wasn't a house. It wasn't a business. It was an alien ship, and fixing it would mean helping that thing go away or stay or do whatever it planned to do. Elias looked at the being again. "If I help you, what happens then?" The being didn't answer. He just continued to stare, motionless, those large, dark eyes fixed on Elias. "Are you going to own me? Are you going to use me? Are you going to kill me?" Elias felt his voice shake again. "Because I need to know. I need to know what I'm doing before something strange happened." The being slowly raised its hand and touched its own chest again. And then, without any audible sound, without any movement of lips, Elias heard something. Not with your ears, but inside your mind. One word, simple, clear, peace. Elias froze. His heart stopped for a second, then started beating again, faster this time. He looked around, trying to understand where the voice had come from, but there was no one, just him and the being. You talked inside my head," Elias whispered, feeling panic rising in his throat. This is possession. You're in my mind. You're non-possession communication." Elias backed away, feeling his legs tremble. "Get out of my head. Get out." But the voice did not return. The being simply lowered his hand and continued to watch, patient and calm. Elias was breathing fast now, almost hyperventilating. This was exactly what he feared. Mind control, manipulation, the first step to complete possession. He had to leave. He had to escape. He had to. But then he realized something. He was still in control. His thoughts were still his own. His movements were still his own. The voice hadn't ordered anything, hadn't demanded anything. It just communicated peace. Elias stood there in the middle of the dark valley, blue light pulsing erratically behind him, cold wind blowing in his face, staring at a being that shouldn't exist, trying to decide whether to run away or if he stayed. And for the first time in years, Elias Thorne felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Genuine curiosity, not fear disguised as curiosity, not obligation disguised as courage, but real curiosity. Deep, the desire to know, and that scared him more than any demon ever could, because it meant that deep down maybe he no longer believed everything he had been taught. And if he didn't believe anymore, who was he? Elias took 3 quick steps back, nearly tripping on a loose rock. His heart hammered against his ribs as if trying to escape. He shook his head violently, trying to block out the sound of that voice that had echoed inside his mind. "No," he said aloud, more to himself than anything else. "No, no, no. This isn't right. This is wrong." Elias turned abruptly and began walking back to the truck, his steps quick and awkward over the uneven ground. He needed to get out of here. He needed to go home, lock the doors, pray, ask for divine protection, forget this had ever happened. But when he was halfway to the truck, he stopped. Not because he wanted to, but because a thought hit him hard, paralyzing his feet in place. If this was really a fallen angel, a demon, why hasn't it attacked me yet? Elias stood there, breathing rapidly, cold sweat trickling down his temples despite the frigid wind. He glanced over his shoulder, observing the being still standing motionless near the damaged panel. Everything he'd learned about demons, fallen angels, and evil entities all said the same thing. They seduce, they deceive, they use beautiful words, false promises, and tempting offers. But that being had done none of that. I hadn't promised anything. I hadn't offered anything. I hadn't tried to seduce him with smooth words or glorious visions. I had simply asked for help silently, almost humbly. Elias shook his head, trying to push the thought away. "No," he whispered. "That's part of the deception. That's exactly what they do. They pretend to be harmless to lower your guard." But then another thought arose, even more disturbing. He could have attacked me when I got out of the truck. When I approached, when I turned my back, he had dozens of opportunities. Elias felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the night wind. He looked at the being again, observing the strange figure, still patient. The large dark eyes fixed on him, but without aggression, no visible threat. "Why?" Elias muttered. "Why didn't you do anything?" The being didn't respond. There was no more voice in his head, only silence. And somehow, that silence was even more disturbing than any answer. Elias clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms. His mind raced, trying to find an explanation that fit his beliefs. Maybe the being was too weak to attack. Maybe it needed Elias to repair the ship first, so it could gain enough power to possess it. Maybe it was all an elaborate trap. Yes, it had to be that. But a small voice in the back of his mind whispered another possibility. A possibility he didn't want to consider. A possibility he struggled to ignore, but one that kept coming back, insistent, relentless. "What if you're wrong?" "No," Elias said aloud, his voice firm, but with a hint of desperation. "I'm not wrong. I know what the Bible says. I know what the preachers teach. I know." He stopped because another question arose, cutting through all his certainties like a blade. What if not helping is worse? Elias felt his stomach churn. He looked at the being, then at the damaged dashboard, then at his own truck, and he realized something that filled him with terror. He was vulnerable, completely vulnerable, alone in the middle of nowhere with no communication, no GPS. If that being wanted to do something evil, it could have done it already. But if Elias refused to help, what was to stop the being from doing something? The logic was disturbing, almost as if he had no choice. Help and risk being possessed. Or refuse and risk. What? Wrath? Revenge? Something worse? Elias felt panic rise in his throat. "This isn't fair," he whispered. "This isn't. I shouldn't be in this situation. I didn't do anything to deserve this." But even as he said the words, another part of his mind, a cynical and bitter part that had grown in recent years, whispered, "You never did anything to deserve many of the things that happened. So why should this be any different?" Elias turned fully, staring at the being. "What do you want from me?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty valley. "Why me? Why did you bring me here?" Silence, just the wind, and that blue light blinking ever dimmer. Elias took a step toward the truck again, determined to get away somehow, even if he had to walk miles in the dark. But then he stopped again because he realized something. His hands were shaking, his heart was racing. Sweat covered his forehead, but it wasn't just fear, it was indecision. And Elias Thorne hated indecision, hated doubt. I hated not being completely sure about what to do. He had always been a man of firm convictions, even when those convictions hurt him, even when they isolated him, even when they left him alone. But now, Standing there, looking at something that defied all his beliefs, he felt lost. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, the admission coming out painfully, as if it were tearing something from deep within his chest. "I've always known what to do. I've always had the Bible, the teachings, the rules. But now I don't know." He looked up at the dark, star-filled sky. "God, give me a sign. Please tell me what to do. Tell me if this is a test, a temptation, or something else." Only silence answered. The same silence that had answered his prayers for the past 8 years. The same silence that had accompanied him since the divorce, since his son stopped speaking to him, since his life fell apart. Elias felt anger rising inside him. Anger at God, anger at the self, anger at himself. "Why me?" he screamed to the heavens. "Why do I always have to suffer? Why do I always have to be tested? What have I done so wrong to deserve this?" And then, in the silence that followed, Elias realized something. He was talking to God the same way he talked about his ex-wife, the same way he thought about his son, with anger, with resentment, with the feeling of having been wronged, abandoned, punished without reason. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Elias staggered to the truck and leaned against the hood, breathing heavily. He closed his eyes, trying to process what he had just realized, but it was too much. Everything was too much. "I need to go," he murmured. "I need to get out of here before what? Before he was possessed. Before he lost his faith. Before he realized something about himself that he wasn't ready to face." Elias opened his eyes and looked at the being again. And this time he really looked. The being wasn't threatening. It wasn't advancing. It was doing nothing but waiting, patient, calm, as if it had all the time in the world, or as if he had no choice. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't pity. He didn't want to feel sorry for a possible demon, but it was recognition, the recognition of someone who was also trapped, also vulnerable, also in need of help, and didn't know if anyone would come. "This is manipulation," Elias said aloud, trying to convince himself. "You're making me feel sorry. You're playing with my emotions." But the being did not respond. He did nothing to confirm or deny, and that silence, that complete absence of obvious manipulation, was what disturbed Elias most. Because if that were really a demon, a fallen angel, an evil entity trying to deceive him, shouldn't it be more convincing, more persuasive, more active? Elias ran his hand over his face, feeling a deep sense of exhaustion. He was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted, and a part of him, a small but growing part, just wanted to get it over with. "Okay," he said finally, his voice low and tired. "Okay, I'll look at the dashboard. But if you try anything, if you try to possess me or hurt me or anything, I swear I will fight. I will fight until my last breath." He grabbed his toolbox from the back seat of the truck, closed the door, and began walking slowly toward the damaged dashboard. With every step, his mind screamed, "Warnings, go back, run away. This is a trap." But Elias kept walking, not because he was brave, not because he believed he was doing the right thing, but because deep down in a place he didn't want to admit existed, he was tired of running, tired of living in fear, tired of always being right, but always alone. And maybe, just maybe, a small part of him wanted to find out if everything he believed was wrong, even if this discovery destroyed him. Elias stopped about 10 feet from the damaged panel, the toolbox heavy in his hand. He could see better now. The panel was recessed into the side of the metal frame, an opening that appeared to have been forced open, or perhaps designed to open in emergencies. Inside was a complexity of components he had never seen before, but at the same time, he recognized patterns. There was something that looked like circuits, something that looked like conductors, something that definitely looked like a blown fuse with carbon marks around it and partially melted wires. The organization was alien. The technology was incomprehensible, but the basic principles were universal. Electricity was electricity. Conduction was conduction. Overload was overload. Elias placed the toolbox on the floor and knelt beside the panel, keeping a cautious distance from the figure standing motionless a few feet away. He opened the box, the metal of his tools gleaming in the pulsing blue light. "I'll just look," Elias said aloud, more to himself than to the being. "I'll assess the damage. I'm not promising to fix anything. The being did not respond. It did not move. Elias took a deep breath and leaned in to examine the panel more closely. He could feel heat emanating from the components. Not the intense heat of something about to explode, but the residual heat of something that had recently overheated. He cautiously reached out, his fingers hesitating in midair before touching the edge of the panel. The metal was warm, and it had a strange texture. It wasn't exactly metal as he knew it. It was softer, almost organic, but definitely solid, like something between metal and something else he didn't have the vocabulary to describe. Elias quickly withdrew his hand, looking at his fingers. No marks, no burns, just the strange sensation of that impossible texture. He grabbed his flashlight from the toolbox and shone it inside the panel. The light revealed more details. The wires weren't exactly wires. They were more like veins, translucent tubes with something flowing inside, something that glowed faintly with a bluish hue. And the components seemed to grow out of each other, integrated in a way that defied any engineering logic Elias knew. But there, at the center of it all, was something he definitely recognized. One point of failure. A larger component about the size of a baseball was charred, cracked with obvious signs of electrical overload, and all the wires or veins connected to it were blackened, some completely melted at the ends. Elias sat back on his heels, processing what he was seeing. This was real, tangible. He could touch it. He could see it. He could understand the basics, even without understanding the full technology. This wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't mind manipulation. This was a real spaceship with a real electrical problem and a real alien being waiting for it to fix it. Elias felt something shift inside him. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was recognition. The recognition that something profoundly impossible was happening. And he could no longer deny it. How did this happen? Elias asked, mostly to himself, but looking in the being's direction. Overload? Impact? Manufacturing defect? He didn't expect an answer, and there wasn't one. The being remained motionless, just watching. Elias turned his attention to the panel. He grabbed his multimeter, a tool he'd used for decades to measure voltage, resistance, and continuity. He touched the probes to different parts of the intact wires away from the burned component. The multimeter beeped. The numbers on the digital display flashed and then stabilized. Elias frowned. There was current. Weak, erratic, but there, and the voltage. Elias looked at the numbers again in disbelief. 240 volts approximately, similar to the electrical system in a large house, but with strange fluctuations. He moved the probes to different points, mentally mapping the energy flow. And the more he tested, the more he noticed something that simultaneously fascinated and terrified him. That made sense. Not completely, not in every detail, but the basic principles were understandable. There was a power source somewhere within the structure. There were circuits distributing that power. There were regulatory components, and one of them had failed, causing a cascade of problems. Elias could fix that. Not perfectly, not with the tools and materials he had, but he could make a temporary fix, something that would allow the system to work again, at least partially. And this realization filled him with profound terror because it meant he actually had to make a choice. Elias put the multimeter back in the box and stood, taking a few steps back from the panel. He looked at the being, then at the entire structure, then back at his own hands. "I can fix this," he said aloud, his voice sounding strange in the silence of the valley. "It won't be perfect. It'll be makeshift, temporary, but it'll work well enough for you to do whatever you need to do." The being didn't respond, but Elias felt something, a focused attention, as if every word he said was being weighed, evaluated. Elias ran a hand through his hair, feeling sweat mix with the dust of the wind. "But if I do this, if I fix your ship, then I'm helping you. I'm choosing to help something I've been taught my whole life is evil. That is dangerous. That is," he stopped because the word stuck in his throat was demonic. But somehow looking at that being standing there, silent, patient, non-threatening, the word didn't seem to fit anymore. Elias stepped forward, facing the being directly. His voice was shaky, but determined. "I need to know. Before I do anything, I need to know the truth." He took a deep breath, feeling his heart hammer. Are you a fallen angel? The silence that followed seemed to stretch on for an eternity. The being just watched him, those large, dark eyes fixed on him with no expression Elias could interpret. And then, before any response could come, the blue light on the structure flickered more brightly for a moment, and then an entire section went dark completely. The low humming sound coming from inside the ship grew even fainter, almost inaudible, and the being wavered. It was subtle, just a small movement, as if its legs had given out for a split second. The being placed a hand on the side of the structure as if needing support, and Elias saw something that made him momentarily forget his question. The being was weakening, the ship was dying, and the being was connected to it somehow. Not physically, perhaps, but energetically, spiritually in some way. Elias didn't fully understand, but he could feel it. If the ship died completely, the being would die, too. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. His question still echoed in the air, unanswered, but suddenly it seemed less important than the fact that something was dying before him. "You're going to die if I don't fix this," he said. Not a question. It was a statement. The being didn't answer, but its wide, dark eyes remained fixed on Elias, and there was something in them now. It wasn't pleading. It wasn't manipulation. It was just acceptance. The acceptance of someone who had done all they could and was now in the hands of another. Elias closed his eyes, feeling the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders like a giant boulder. His question would go unanswered for now. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't chosen to be here. He didn't want to have to make this impossible choice. But here he was, and the choice was before him, clear and inevitable. Help and risk everything you believed in, or refuse and bear the weight of a death you could have prevented. Elias opened his eyes and looked at the being again, and for the first time since arriving in that valley, he truly saw it. Not as a demon, not as a fallen angel, not as a theological threat, but as a living being, vulnerable, alone, in need of help, just like Elias. "Damn," Elias whispered, feeling tears sting his eyes. "Damn, damn, damn." He knelt down beside the panel again, picked up his tools, and began to work. Because in the end, Elias Thorne discovered something about himself that he didn't know before. He discovered that when faced with the choice between his beliefs and the life of another being, he could not let someone die, even if that someone could be everything he ever feared. And this discovery changed something fundamental within him, something that would never be the same again. But the question still echoed in his mind, unanswered, waiting. And Elias knew that as soon as he finished the repairs, he would demand an answer. He needed to know the truth, even if that truth shook everything he'd ever believed. Elias worked in silence for nearly 20 minutes, his hands moving with the automatic precision of decades of experience. He had improvised a temporary bypass using copper wire from his own toolbox, connecting the working circuits around the burned-out component. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't permanent, but it should work. His hands shook occasionally, not so much from fear now as from pure adrenaline. He was repairing an alien ship. The reality of it kept hitting him in waves, making his stomach churn. The being remained nearby throughout the process, watching silently. Elias could feel its presence, its eyes fixed on him. But strangely, he didn't feel threatened. He felt, watched, evaluated perhaps, as if the being was trying to understand not only what Elias was doing, but who he was. Elias tightened the last makeshift connector and stepped back, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "There," he said aloud, his voice. "This should restore at least some power. It won't last forever." But he didn't finish his sentence because at that moment the blue light in the structure pulsed more intensely. The sections that had gone dark began to glow again, faintly at first, then brighter. The humming sound returned more steady now, louder, and the being stood straighter, as if energy had been restored not only to the ship, but to him as well. Elias stood slowly, taking a few steps back, watching. The transformation was subtle, but visible. The being seemed more present, more solid, as if it were a blurred image now coming into focus. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, human and alien, staring at each other across the space that separated them. And then, Elias remembered your question. Elias took a deep breath, gathering his courage. His hands were still shaking, but he clenched them into fists at his sides. I helped you, he said, his voice firmer now. I fixed your ship. I could have walked away. I could have let you die, but I didn't. The being continued to watch, motionless. So now, Elias continued, feeling something rising inside him, something between courage and desperation. Now I want an answer. I need an answer. He stepped forward, staring into those wide, dark eyes. Are you a fallen angel? Silence, just the wind and the gentle hum of the restored ship. Elias felt frustration growing. I know you can communicate. You spoke inside my head before, so speak now. Tell me the truth. Are you a demon? Are you an evil entity? Have you come to deceive humanity? The silence stretched, and Elias was about to scream again when something happened. The voice returned, not in his ears, but inside his mind, soft, calm, and completely unexpected in its simplicity. Why do you believe that? Elias blinked, disarmed by the question. What? Why do you believe I am a fallen angel? Because that's what you are, Elias said, frustration tinging his voice. You come from heaven. You have powers beyond human comprehension. You appear in ships that defy our physical laws. You are exactly what the Bible describes. Fallen angels, demons in disguise with powers. Did I come from heaven? The simple question made Elias hesitate. Well, yes, you came from space, from outside the earth. That is from the sky. Is heaven space, or are they different? Elias opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. He'd never thought of it that way. You're playing with words, Elias said, but his voice held less certainty now. No, I'm asking questions. Are you afraid to answer them? Elias felt anger rising. I'm not afraid of anything. I just want straight answers. Yes or no. Are you a fallen angel? There was a pause, and then the voice returned. But this time, there was something different about it. Something that sounded almost like sadness. I'm not what you call a fallen angel, but you won't believe me just because I say so. Elias shook his head just as the voice predicted. Of course not. That's exactly what a demon would say. I'm not a demon. Trust me, you are masters of deception. If I were a master of deception, I wouldn't have asked for your help. I would have seduced you with promises. I would have offered power, wealth, knowledge. I would have made you want to help me. But I didn't do any of that. I just asked. Elias was silent because the logic was undeniable. So, what are you? Elias asked, his voice lower now, less confrontational. I am a traveler, an explorer, a student of existence. You're alien from another planet. Yes, and why are you here on Earth? For the same reasons you drive miles in the dark to fix a stranger's electricity. Because there's work to be done. Because there's knowledge to be shared. Because we're all connected, even when we don't realize it. Elias frowned. Connected? What does that mean? You will find out if you choose to listen. If I choose. Elias shook his head, feeling frustration rising. You keep talking about choices. As if I have any choice here. You've trapped me in this valley. My truck doesn't work. My cell phone doesn't work. I'm stuck here with you. Your truck isn't working because my ship emitted an electromagnetic pulse when it malfunctioned. It wasn't intentional. It was a consequence. And now that I've restored power, I can reverse it. Elias blinked. Can you get my truck running again? Yes. Elias frowned, an obvious question arising. If you can fix my truck with whatever it is you do, why didn't you fix your own ship? Because my hands can't touch what your hands touch. My technology responds to my energy, but what failed was something physical, something material. I could manipulate energy around me, but I couldn't reconnect melted wires. I couldn't create bypasses for burned-out components. For that, I needed someone who understood basic electrical principles and had manual dexterity. I needed you. The explanation made sense in a strange way. Elias nodded slowly, still processing. Then do it, he said, his voice still defiant. Get my truck running now. Prove you're not keeping me here." There was a pause, and then the being raised a hand. Elias instinctively recoiled, but the being didn't move toward him. It just held its hand up, and Elias felt something, a vibration in the air, something imperceptible to the normal senses, but present nonetheless. And then, behind him, Elias heard something that made his heart skip a beat, the sound of an engine starting. He turned sharply, looking at his truck. The interior lights were on, the dashboard glowed, the engine purred smoothly, perfectly functional. Elias stood there, mouth open, trying to process what had just happened. "You're free to go. Always have been." The door was never locked, just temporarily closed by circumstances. Elias looked at the being, then at the truck, then back at the being. He could leave now, this moment. Get in the truck, drive back to the main road, go home, forget all of this. But something was stopping him. It wasn't fear, it wasn't obligation, it was curiosity. Genuine, deep curiosity about what that being had to say. About answers Elias had carried as questions for years. "You still haven't answered my question," Elias said slowly, his voice calmer now, but still cautious. "About fallen angels? You said you're not one. But do they exist?" The being stood still for a moment, those large, dark eyes fixed on Elias, and then the voice returned, and there was something different about it now, something patient, like a teacher about to explain something complex. "Fallen angels exist, but not in the way you've been taught." Elias felt his heart race. "What do you mean?" "You believe that fallen angels are a separate caste, powerful evil beings created perfect who chose to rebel, all-powerful entities who hunt humans to possess and destroy, correct?" "Yes," Elias whispered. "That's exactly it. You are wrong." The words were simple, but they carried immense weight. Elias felt his legs weaken. "So, what are they?" "Fallen angels are not a separate caste of beings. They are spirits just like you." Elias shook his head, confused. "No, I'm human. They're fallen angels. They're different. You are human now. But you are not just a body. You are spirit inhabiting a body. And this spirit is eternal. It existed before you were born. It will exist after you die. And throughout its eternal existence, it evolves." Elias was shaking now. I don't understand. Let me explain simply. The Creator does not create some beings perfect and others imperfect. He does not create angels on one side and inferior humans on the other. That would be unfair. All spirits are created equal, simple, ignorant, with infinite potential for evolution. But the angels are no different from you, Elias. They are spirits who have evolved greatly, who have learned, who have grown through countless experiences, countless lives, countless choices. They weren't created perfect. They have become wise through evolution. Elias felt the ground shift beneath his feet. What about the fallen angels? Fallen angels are spirits who during their evolution chose paths contrary to love. They chose anger, hatred, selfishness, and manipulation. They became stuck in these patterns. But they are not all-powerful. They are not invincible demons. They are simply spirits trapped in low frequencies. Spirits who have not yet learned certain lessons. Frequencies? Elias asked, his voice barely a whisper. Everything in the universe operates on vibrational frequencies. Love, gratitude, peace, and compassion are high frequencies. Anger, hatred, fear, and resentment are low frequencies. And the universe operates on a simple principle. Like attracts like. Elias felt something chill inside him. What? What are you saying? I'm saying that fallen angels, those spirits stuck in low frequencies, can only approach you if you're on the same frequency. If you live in constant anger, you'll tune into angry spirits. If you live in fear, you'll attract spirits that feed on fear. They don't come because they're all-powerful. They come because you call them through your own frequency. Elias recoiled, shaking his head violently. No. You're saying it's my fault that I attract demons. It's not guilt. It's consequence. You're not a victim of all-powerful external forces, Elias. You're becoming a victim of your own emotional frequencies. And until you understand this, Until you continue to believe they're invincible external demons, you'll remain trapped. Stuck in what? Elias screamed, tears streaming down his face. Now trapped in a cycle, anger attracts angry spirits. They amplify your anger. You think they're your own thoughts, but they're actually external influences fueling what was already inside you. The anger grows, becomes obsessive, uncontrollable, and you move further and further away from the divine within. God dwells within you, Elias. But anger and resentment create distance from that connection. And the further away you are, the more vulnerable you become to these influences. Elias was shaking all over now, because every word resonated with something deep inside him. Years of obsessive thoughts about his ex-wife's betrayal. Years of anger that never diminished, only grew. Years of feeling alienated from God, feeling haunted, feeling possessed by emotions he couldn't control. So what do I do? He whispered desperately. How do I stop this? You change your frequency as through something you were taught is weakness, but is actually the greatest power there is. What? Elias asked, his voice breaking. Forgiveness. Forgiveness? Elias repeated the word as if it were foreign to his tongue. He shook his head, wiping the tears from his face with the back of his hand. I can't forgive. You don't understand what she did to me, what my son did to me. They betrayed me. They abandoned me. I'm not asking you to forgive for them. I'm asking you to forgive for you. Elias frowned. What does that mean? Anger is an open door, Elias. Every time you relive betrayal, every time you harbor resentment, every time you wallow in self-pity, you're opening a door. And through that door, spirits living on that same frequency can enter. They don't force their way in. You invite them in through your own emotional vibration. I don't invite anything, Elias protested, but his voice was weak. You invite them every day. When you wake up and the first thing you do is remember the betrayal. When you see a father with his son and feel bitterness. When you pray but simultaneously blame God for abandoning you. Each of these thoughts is an invitation, and they accept. Elias felt something breaking inside him because he knew, deep down he always knew, the obsessive thoughts that gripped his mind on lonely nights, the anger that surged out of nowhere so intense it shook him, the resentment that grew like a poisonous plant, poisoning every aspect of his life. He always thought it was demons attacking him, but what if he was feeding them? Elias shook his head slowly, still processing everything. So, you're saying fallen angels are real, but they're not what I thought. They're not all powerful forces. They're stagnant spirits that only have influence if I allow them to through low frequencies. Exactly. And here's something you need to understand, Elias. Something that will completely change how you see this. The biggest trap isn't the existence of these stagnant spirits. The biggest trap is the fear of them. Elias frowned. What do you mean? Think about it. You spent years afraid of fallen angels, afraid of possession, afraid of demons. And what frequency did this constant fear keep you on? Elias felt something chill down his spine. Low frequency, he whispered. Yes, fear is one of the lowest frequencies there is. So, ironically, the more you feared fallen angels, the more you placed yourself exactly on the frequency where they could reach you. The fear that was supposed to protect you actually made you more vulnerable. Elias took a step back, processing this revelation. So teaching people to fear fallen angels, to see demons everywhere, to live in constant terror of possession, it's exactly what keeps people stuck. It's exactly what keeps them at low frequencies. It's the perfect cycle. Teach fear, create low frequencies, attract more of what's feared, confirm beliefs, increase fear, and the cycle repeats generation after generation. Elias felt anger rising. So, the churches, the preachers who teach this, who make people live in fear, not everyone does this intentionally. Many genuinely believe what they teach. But yes, this fear-based teaching keeps people trapped in the very thing they should be freeing themselves from. What about the people who fervently defend these ideas? Elias asked, remembering himself. How many heated arguments he had had defending the existence of fallen angels as supreme evil forces. They're hindering their own evolution. Because fervent defense of any belief usually stems from fear. Fear of losing identity. Fear that if that belief collapses, everything collapses. And sometimes there's also anger toward those who think differently and don't accept their ideas. And this fear and anger again keeps the frequency low. It keeps us stagnant. It keeps us precisely where these stagnant spirits can influence us. Elias felt as if he were seeing for the first time a pattern that had always been there, but he had never noticed. So true protection against fallen angels is not more fear, more desperate prayer, more spiritual warfare. True protection is elevation. It's stepping out of the frequency where they exist. It's forgiveness, gratitude, love, peace, and connection with the divine within. When you live in these frequencies, they simply can't reach you. Not because you're fighting them, but because you're vibrating in a place where they can't exist. Like light, Elias murmured, a sudden understanding dawning. Darkness cannot exist where there is light. Not because light fights darkness, but simply because the presence of light dissolves darkness. Exactly. You finally get it. Elias was silent for a long moment, feeling the weight of this truth settle on him. He had spent years fighting shadows when the answer had always been to simply turn on the light within himself. But how do I make people understand this? Elias asked, thinking of so many others like him, living in constant fear, trapped in cycles of spiritual terror. How do I make them see that fear is holding them back, not protecting them? You can't make anyone see anything, Elias. Everyone has their own journey, their own time, but you can be an example. You can raise your own frequency, free yourself from your own chains, and live differently. And those who are ready to see will see, and they will ask, and then you can share. But not by trying to convince, by simply being what you have discovered, free. Elias felt tears coming back, but this time they weren't of pain. They were of release, of deep understanding, of gratitude for this impossible encounter that had changed everything. So, fallen angels exist, Elias said slowly, solidifying his new understanding. But they're not what I was taught. They're not supreme forces of evil. They're stagnant spirits, just as I was once stagnant. And protection doesn't come from fearing them or fighting them. It comes from rising above the frequency where they operate. Yes. And the higher you rise, the more you realize another truth. Even these stagnant spirits will eventually evolve because all spirits, without exception, are on a journey back to the Creator. Some take longer, some choose more difficult paths, but eventually all evolve. There are no spirits lost forever, only spirits at different stages of the journey. Elias looked at the being with renewed admiration. How do you know all this? Because I've been through journeys too. I've made mistakes too. I've learned too. And now, in my current form of existence, I try to share what I've learned with those willing to listen, just as someone once shared with me. Is that what you do? Travel the universe teaching, among other things. There's much work to be done. Many worlds, many beings trapped in unnecessary fear. Many who need only a small push to begin awakening. Elias looked up at the starry sky again, and this time he saw not just stars but possibilities. An entire universe of beings learning, growing, evolving. And he, Elias Thorne, divorced, lonely, bitter. Elias Thorne was part of it. He was an eternal spirit on a journey just like everyone else. You said, God dwells within me, Elias said, his voice soft now. For years I felt separated, abandoned, unworthy. But now I understand. I was pushing myself away through my own lower frequencies. The divine never abandoned me. I who couldn't feel the connection through all the layers of anger and fear I'd built up. Yes, and when you begin to dissolve those layers, when you begin to forgive, to practice gratitude, to consciously choose higher frequency thoughts and emotions, you will feel that connection returning, not because God has returned, but because you have returned. Elias closed his eyes, feeling for the first time in years a sensation he had forgotten existed. Peace. Not complete peace. There was still work to be done, layers to dissolve, patterns to shift. But there was a beginning. A small seed of peace planted in soil that had been barren for so long. And Elias knew with deep certainty that this seed would grow because now he understood the truth that changed everything. Fallen angels were not their all-powerful enemies. They were just mirrors showing the frequencies he was stuck in, and the key to freedom was not fighting them. It was about rising above them. Elias took a step back, observing the being for the last time. The ship's blue light now pulsed with full intensity. Steady, strong. "Thank you," Elias said simply. The being placed a hand on its chest, a gesture that Elias now understood as gratitude, and then began moving toward the entrance of the ship. Elias turned toward his truck, feeling something different inside him, lighter, freer. He got into the vehicle, started the engine, and began climbing back up the slope. When he reached the top and looked back one last time, the ship was no longer there, just the empty valley under the starry sky, as if nothing had happened. Elias smiled and drove home. What Elias discovered that night changed everything he believed about fallen angels. They are not what we were taught to fear. Fallen angels are not a separate caste of all-powerful beings created to destroy us. They are spirits just like us, who have become stuck in lower frequencies. Anger, hatred, resentment, fear. And here is the truth that sets you free. They can only influence us when we are on the same frequency. We are all created equal by the Creator. There are no superior or inferior beings, only spirits at different stages of evolution. Some have learned more, others are stuck in destructive patterns, but all without exception are on a journey back to the divine. True protection doesn't come from fighting fallen angels or living in fear of them. It comes from raise our frequency through forgiveness, gratitude, love, and peace. When we vibrate at these high frequencies, they simply can't reach us, not because we are fighting, but because we are vibrating where they cannot exist. Just as light dissolves darkness, it's time to dissolve the layers of fear and discover who you truly are. We are all evolving, and no one is alone on this journey.